Welcome to the Catholic Theology Show, sponsored in part by Annunciation Circle, a community that supports the mission of Ave Maria University through their monthly donations of $10 or more. If you'd like to support this podcast and the mission of Ave Maria, please go to avemaria.edu/donate for more information. I'm your host, Michael Dauphinais, and today I am thrilled to be joined by Dr. Ray Guarendi. So welcome to the show.
You did all that without a teleprompter?
That's right.
You just looked right into the camera, no teleprompter, just said it all?
Yeah.
You've done this before.
I've tried. So Dr. Ray is by the way, a Catholic father of 10, a clinical psychologist, author, professional speaker, national radio, television host. His radio show, The Doctor Is In, can be heard on over 440 radio stations and Sirius XM channel 130. His EWTN television series, Living Right with Dr. Ray, is aired in 140 countries. Dr. Ray's given over 3,000 talks. And I have to say, by the way, Ray, that I'm so happy because I remember when I was a young parent, when we were young parents, kind of reverts back to our Catholic faith and raising young children. We used to get I think a couple of your books are your little like
8 tracks,
those 8 tracks, or maybe the cassette tapes, and it was always encouraging your view, your kind of advice to parents, and I think, and so it's fun now that we're grandparents, and that we get to pass along some of your teaching and your wisdom to another generation. So,
Mike, I don't appreciate the implication here that I was around when your kids were preschoolers and now you're a grandparent. I mean, what does that make me here, Mike?
That's right.
I would like to say that you started listening to me when I was in middle school.
Yes, that's right. Yes. Well, we were very young, so that does help. But it is great to have you here. And, you know, it's interesting. I think I wanted to talk with you especially about how do we recover love and friendship amidst this kind of epidemic of loneliness that's going on. The Surgeon General in 2023 declared an epidemic of loneliness. And which, of course, was exacerbated in some ways by the CDC and the Surgeon General's lockdowns for sometimes over 18 months in different ways. But during the pandemic and just the loneliness and isolation that was there. But in this statement that they did in 2023, our epidemic of loneliness and isolation, they say the rates of loneliness among young adults has increased every year from 1976 to 2019. So over the last 50 years.
You can't even blame technology back in 76.
Yeah.
Not like now.
No, that's just when maybe coming home and barely even watching reruns in the afternoon with just the TV. And it's been happening. It's just going on. In the State of American Friendship, another study went from like 1990 to 2020. You know, the number of people with basically 2 or fewer friends went from basically like 15% to 40%. And the number of people with more than 5 friends went from 50% to 25%. So we're becoming increasingly atomized. So you're a psychologist. You give talks all over the country on marriage, family, friendship, all these different things. I'd just love to kind of help for our audience kind of unpack some of your wisdom and experience, tips and strategies for a little bit of what's the situation we're in and what are things that we can do as to kind of recover and foster friendships.
I feel better, Michael, giving you answers for individuals than I do for culture. Culture relentlessly moves in its own way. And I think those of us who are Christians are going to have to act very differently. The old saying is, to have a friend, you have to be a friend. Several things are impacting all this. Of course, obviously, we have more quote-unquote contacts than we've ever had in our lives. You know, I have this many followers. Did I tell you that, Michael? Yeah. I saw a meme once where 2 guys who were funeral home directors were standing in front of a coffin. Out in the room was 2 people sitting in 2 chairs that were set up for about 500. And the funeral director said, I don't understand it. He had 1,000 followers. So that's the first thing. We're chasing shallow friendships. It's not going to happen. Now, what do you do about it? Well, you have to decide, I don't want to do this. That's the first thing. Many people just go, well, the culture's flowing in that direction. I'll just flow in that direction. That's the easiest way to go. You got to be a dead fish to go with the flow of the river. You got to be a live fish to go against it. So that's the first thing. One of the simplest rules, I think, to make connections with people. My son was 17, came to me and said, hey, Dad, how can I get girls to want to be around me? How can I talk to girls so they say, yeah, gee, I really like John, and I want to have John more in my life? I said, that's simple, John. Ask them all about themselves. You sit down with them, ask them about their families, their kids. Well, maybe not kids. Their siblings, schools, college, future plans. Keep the conversation focused on them. People will say to me, you know, I first met that guy. He was so appealing. I just wanted to be around him. Well, what was it? You know, the more I think about it, he was asking all about me. He asked me all kinds of things. My opinions, my family, my job. How do you do that? And I was made so comfortable. I just wanted to have more contacts with this person. So that's the first thing. You got to get out of your little tiny circle of, let me tell you about me. You know, that stuff you read about me there, that was embarrassing. It really was. Because it makes it sound like there's something special about what I have to offer. Yeah, I've had the ability to do that, the opportunity to do that. But there's about 8 people in my life that I would want them to say, Ray is the easiest person to be around. That's what I would want. First and foremost is my wife. So I guess I'd say to some of the guys out there, would your spouse say that you treat her better than you treat anybody else? Or would she say, well, I tell you what, I wish I got some of the compliments he gives his golfing buddies, that's for sure. Or would the guy say, I wish she was as nice to me as she is to the ladies at church. They all think she's a walking saint. I'd like to see some of that. So that's the first thing I suggest. You want your spouse, that's the ideal. You want your spouse to say, my spouse treats me better than he or she treats anyone else. That's what you want them to say. And if they're not saying that, then you got to look at yourself. Why do they think that? Why do they think I'm so much easier to get along with than with everybody else than with the people in my closest circle? If you can't do that, you're going to have a heck of a time forming any kind of durable bond with anybody else. So, first piece of advice.
Wow, that's really beautifully put. And I love the focus from kind of seeing the larger problems in the culture to really looking at ourselves and to looking at, you know, one of the things I often kind of identify or at least share with students is that, like, one of the things we learn in the Christian story is that part of the problem with the world is us, right? I think it was G.K. Chesterton who said, what's wrong with the world? I am. And so when I begin to do that, now some people think that's kind of a depressing or a downer, but it seems to me what happens is that gives us responsibility, that gives us, like, we then have the capacity to change. And when we realize that maybe one of the difficulties in our relationships, right, is us, then we can begin to take responsibility. And I love that idea of trying to say, what can I do to be the best version of myself around those that I care most deeply about?
One of the things that we Christians have to struggle with, I remember I was in an evangelical Bible class for years as I left the Catholic Church. I wasn't mad at her, Mike. I was a new atheist. The new atheists are very dangerous. They say there is a God, but he thinks just like me. That's the new atheist. The old atheist said there's no God, so that makes sort of logical sense. If there is no God, I can do what I want. You know, Solzhenitsyn said that. Everything's permissible. But the new atheist, I was like that. Well, there's a God, but, you know, there's certain ways I think he might want to consider. So I was in Bible study, and the question kept coming up. Why do people get so upset with us Christians? Why? Why does our morality threaten them? And the common answer was, well, down deep, they must know we're right. And down deep, there must be a flicker of a light in them that says, these Christians, they put me off, but gee, I got to think there's something to that. And I remember thinking, I'm not sure that's the answer. You can be holy, or you can be a jerk. And I said, would these people say the Christians in my life are the easiest, most pleasant people in my life to get along with? Or would they say there's a certain quiet superiority to some of the Christians I know? Certain unspoken kind of, I'm a little cut above you spiritually. I said, you can be holy, you can be a jerk. You can be holy, you can be holier than thou. So I thought that was such a huge thing, because I want people to say, the guy's a Christian. And I'll tell you what, he's one of the nicest people to be around. Now, this doesn't mean you have to be this wishy-washy compromise on every morals. No, that's not that at all. But there's a certain easiness that appeals to people, where they say, yeah, I want to invite him. He's just a lot of fun, He makes you feel like you're something special. I had a friend who, I don't know where he was in his belief with God. His 21-year-old son was killed in a car wreck. He called me up and he said, Ray, I want you to speak at the funeral home. I said, John, why? He said, well, I know what you believe. And I think you're the one to say that stuff. Well, I would like to think, Mike, that it was something about the fact that he knew we were on different wavelengths. His life was very different than my own, but he was a good friend of mine. I had another friend say to me one time, we're sitting in a car. I grew up with this guy. And I was probably 55, he's 57 when he said this. We're driving in the car and he goes, Raym, I'm an atheist. And I said, yeah, Dave, I know that. Well, I didn't know if you knew that, but I just figured you might not want to have anything to do with me. Dave, I grew up with you. You're my friend. Why would I not want to have anything to do with you? Well, I know what you believe, and that stuff means a lot to you, and I'm real different that way. I go, yeah, I know. So? He couldn't believe it. He had this image of the Christian was going to say, well, Dave, we can only be so friendly with you now because you're just kind of out there spiritually. And I think that's what we Christians got to work on a lot more. They got to be able to say, the Christians in my life, they are the most appealing people to be around. And it goes beyond that Christian joy. We have to have Christian joy, so they say, what is it about you that I just want a piece of? Mike, I always say it. People go, well, I just want to live the faith, so people say, Ray, what do you have? I want some of that. I've never had anybody in my life come up to me, Mike, and say, Ray, you're such a holy guy that I really want to know what it is that makes you so holy. I've never had that happen. And I think there's reason for that. One, I'm probably not perfectly holy, so people focus on the fact where I fall short. So, okay, I'm not the perfect model. But I think a lot more of it is that kind of quote-unquote self-joy. I'm not reaching out to you. Yeah, I'm pretty content with myself, Mike. But, oh, yeah, you teach at the university? Oh, that's nice. That's nice. Hey, did I tell you I was on Oprah? Did I tell you about that there, Mike? It was really interesting what happened with me. Right away, quick, I'm just off. I'm not interested in you. Now, you said are you philosophy?
Theology.
Theology, okay. Yeah. Because philosophy is one of those things that messes up your mind for the rest of your life. You just sit there and go, if the tree falls in the woods, does it make a sound? There's a modern gender counterpart to that. If a man is in the woods, all alone, and there are no women there to hear him speak, if he speaks, is he still wrong?
Still wrong.
He's still wrong. And when I say this to the women, they go, duh.
Yeah, it is. I think that what you're describing here is it's interesting because I think you're going right to what, John Paul II would talk about and became so kind of famous for.
Is he stealing my stuff?
I think he did. I think he did steal it. But it's a gift of self, that when we give ourselves to others, when we use our mind and our understanding and our emotions, right, to be present to be interested in the other, then that is what kind of friendship is. It's, as Aristotle will call it, and Aquinas will talk about it, it's to wish the good of the other. But to wish the good of the other person, I have to know the other person enough to begin to know what's
good for 'em.
Be good for them, given, right, like each of our fingerprints are utterly unique, right? Each of our stories are utterly unique.
That's why I wear gloves when I break into places.
So how do we balance maybe a little bit of that sense of getting to know the person, accept them as they are, so we really do love that person and we don't love an idealized version of who that person could become if they changed, right? We love the person as they are, and also kind of encourage the other person, to grow.
Couple of things. Parents will say to me, well, my daughter moved in with her boyfriend. And she knows how we think about that. So what do? They want to come over our house for dinner. So what do? I say, you let them come over your house for dinner. I don't want to condone that. How are you condoning it? You raised her for 20 years. She knows how you think. There's no shock here. Yes, but if we just all of a sudden welcome him into our family and we accept him, that's like saying we just think this is okay. It's religious indifferentism. No, it isn't. You're basically loving the guy even though you have your moral stance on this. That's one of the biggest things I deal with, Mike. People think that if they are kind and loving to someone who is in inveterate sin, they're condoning it. You're not condoning it. Our Lord sat with the sinners. Did he say to them, now listen, guys, I'm telling you, you're going to get one meal out of me. That's it. You don't straighten up after this meal, I'm not coming back. I don't know if he did, but I don't think he did. So that's the first thing. The second thing I want to ask you is this, Mike. Is there anybody in your social circle that you associate with or you know briefly as an acquaintance that has no food?
No.
Right. Is there anybody that in your social circle that has no shelter?
No.
Is there anybody in your social circle that really wants for the basics of life?
Not today.
So what can you give them? You can give them you.
Give them you.
You can give them you.
Yeah.
And they don't need food. All right? They need me to be a decent guy with them. They need me to be easygoing. I just got a book coming out, and it's how to get along with almost everybody. And one of the chapters is easygoing. Just, hey, Mike, you want to catch breakfast? Yeah, that's good. Well, where you want to go? Ray, you call it. No, Mike, you call it. I got it. It just, and then how often would Mike say, well, I want to go to that First Watch place. I don't like that, Mike. Let's pick someplace else. I don't like that. That's not easy going. It's like, yeah, okay, if that's where Mike wants to go, let's go there. Okay, or movie. I asked my wife, what do you want to watch, honey? Well, I want to watch that a show where they adopt these two dogs, and then they take in this pet elephant, and then the one woman she goes on a mission trip, and I'm thinking I want to watch Terminator 5. All right, honey, let's watch what you want to watch. It's just easy going. It's kind of the everyday tiny little stuff that accumulates. And goes, man, oh man, that guy's just easy to get along with. And people mistake that for thinking I have no morals. They're two different things.
Yeah, Aristotle speaks of that in the Ethics, kind of amicability or amiableness, just friendliness, being kind of warm and hospitable with our time. Of course, I'm thinking that the most recent time we tried to watch a movie, my wife said something about watching a show where they adopted a camel that had been injured. And
that's really going to push you to the limits of your easygoingness. I will say we didn't watch the camel one. You could have fallen asleep 6 minutes into it. Yeah.
But now I am but I do have that sense, that maybe what would it mean to really foster that sense of being easy to be around Another thing that I think a lot of people struggle with today is you spoke about moral divisions or, and divides or disagreements. And we have so many, I think, political disagreements today as well that often kind of blend with the moral issues about, I don't know, maybe everything from like abortion to same-sex marriage. And I think a lot of people struggle with that same relationship between, condoning or becoming emotionally reactive when family members or friends express views.
I can't relate to you because I know how you think. Christians have to really watch because if you probably took a poll, Mike, we would be considered among the most judgmental of people. And I think that's an accusation sometimes we deserve. But sometimes we get accused of it when we're not being judgmental. Mm-hmm. For example, I had a niece come up to me one time at her wedding or something. She said, Uncle Ray, I think you and Aunt Randy are the most judgmental people I know. I said, Stephanie, how is that? Tell me how that is. How do I do that? Well, you think blah, 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 blah. I go, have I ever said anything to you about it? No, but I know you think it. There's the difference. See, we're not allowed to think what we're allowed to think because people think, well, I know how you think, so therefore you're judgmental. You're judging me. That's tough on Christians because you're getting a false accusation. What are you going to do about that? And the only way you counter it is to be the kind of person that they somewhat like to be around, Another thing that helps, when you got these kind of disagreements, oftentimes people, when they disagree with someone, it's an I say, you say. Well, here's what I think. Well, this is what I think. Well, this is why you're wrong. Well, this is why I'm right. That's kind of how the conversation goes. So if one of my relatives comes up to me and says, a woman has a right to choose, it's her body. And I could immediately go, well, what about the baby's body? The baby's got a body too, Right away, boom.
Yeah.
Instead, you do what shrinks have to do. I got to get in your head. How did you come to that conclusion? How do you see it that way? Well, I just believe that it's her body and she needs to do what she wants. Is there any other cases where a woman can't do with her body what she wants? In other words, I'm going to get inside your head because I want to understand how you got to that view. I'm not going to sit here and dispute you, but I want you to explain to me how you got there. And a lot of times what happens, Mike, is people have not thought through their positions. You know this. And so when they're asked to explain them and take them out to the natural, logical, they can't. They get frustrated. Well, it's a baby, but we don't know when it's a baby. Okay, so if you don't know when it's a baby, what do you do with that? Well, you have to decide. Okay, fair enough. So who decides? Go ahead, just explain to me. Mm-hmm. And that's a way I think you can relate to somebody in these tough issues without saying, well, I'm going to tell you why I'm right and you're wrong and you can roast in hell,
It reminds me, Brandon Vaught has a book called A Return or something about helping, I think, children or family members who have wandered from the faith come back. But one of the things
how does he do that? That's a good one.
Yeah, I don't know. But one idea that he mentioned that I thought was kind of just interesting is he calls them like pebble questions. And it's like he wants them to be like pebbles in their shoes that begin to annoy them. And so one of the things you kind of like ask something like, well, why do you believe that? Why do you believe that God doesn't exist?
There it
like
is.
If you don't believe God doesn't exist, why don't you believe God doesn't exist?
What do you mean? You can't look around you and see all this? Can't you see that this had to be designed by somebody? Yeah, that's what we instinctively we do that.
Yeah.
And immediately, whether they want to wrestle with God or they don't, now you're making me defend myself. And I'm digging my heels in.
Yeah.
But you're absolutely right.
Yeah. And interesting, this kind of, now we're getting to very specific issues, say like difficult political, moral issues like abortion or other, socioeconomic, Marxist questions or different things like this. These are like, these economic stuff that people can be very divided over, as well as does God exist? Does God not exist? Did Christ found the church? These sorts of questions. But it's interesting. We're going back to the principle that you began with, which is, right, if you want to get a date, ask her to tell you about herself. Right? And so kind of that becomes then maybe like a general kind of principle. I remember hearing something from Saint Jose Maria Escriva, who was the founder of Opus Dei, a 20th century saint. But one of the things he said was that charity does not so much consist in giving, but in understanding. And it's like we can't really understand the other person if we don't ask questions about the other person. And, it's like somebody mentioned one time we have to, take the cotton out of our ears and put it in our mouth.
Oh, that's a good one. That's a good one. You're right because, well, I'm saying you're right. Of course you're right. For me to know you, to understand what makes you tick, it's been said that people want to be understood more than they want to be agreed with. And if we come away from a discussion or a conversation or even just a brief interchange, and we come away and you feel like, yeah, Ray really kind of listened to me. He accepted me. He didn't jump right in and have to make his point. I think people struggle with, especially Christians, we struggle with this old, well, yeah, but that scripture verse that says if you don't correct an evil man from his ways, you're going to be held accountable. It's like, oh, wait a minute, man, I don't want to be the moral police here with everybody I know.
Yeah.
Parents will say to me, well, my daughter's living with her boyfriend, and I brought up the subject. She don't want to hear it. I said, then shut up. Well, but I got to let her know. You let her know. She didn't accept it. There's a phrase that is given to mothers and mother-in-laws on their daughter's wedding day, daughter-in-laws. Sit up, shut up, and wear beige. That's very good in most interchanges. You got to know when to let it go, Louis. People don't like that. They don't like being bam, bam, bam. For example, a grandparent will say to me, my granddaughter's 6 years old. They haven't baptized her. Well, have you talked about it? Oh, we talked about it. Yeah, my daughter-in-law just doesn't want to hear it anymore. I go, well, then don't say it anymore. Yeah, but it's so important. It's just so important that she's baptized. Yeah. She don't want to hear it. You want to get along with your granddaughter? Yeah. Well, then know when to shut up. And we can't let that go. There's something that says, well, I'm obligated. I'm obligated to straighten them up. Oh, you're not.
This is a great place. We're going to take a break in a minute, but when we come back, I want to look a little bit. You have a book. I think you have two books, by the way. One, Thinking Like Jesus, Psychology
That's
of
pretty
a
arrogant of me, isn't
Disciple.
it?
That's right.
I would tell you how Jesus thinks.
And then you have another one called Jesus, the Master Psychologist. Right. Listen to him. And so I want to talk a little bit about how do we kind of also like remember in a way that, right, all all human friendships are all going to be beautiful and inadequate at times, right? That we do need a relationship with Jesus, and that also Jesus was not only God, but he was also man, and he had relationships. And, as you were talking about that, I was thinking about, well, I was just reading in, the Gospel of John towards the upper room scenes, and you got Peter there, he's going to deny him. Judas, who's going to betray him.
Jesus needed a good public relations firm. He really did. How'd he pick these guys out?
Yeah. But he told him. He told Peter that he was going to deny him. He told Judas what was going to happen. But like once, yeah. He didn't just keep.
Remember what I said there, Peter?
He didn't keep nagging them, but he did. He said it, and then he. I don't know what else to say, but like he respected their freedom, even their freedom up to the point of corrupting their freedom. Uh-huh. And so I think that is kind of maybe a model
Yeah, it is.
where we can share our views, our concerns. That's appropriate within friendships that should have a kind of reciprocity. And then, but that's not the same as or in relationships, even parental ones don't give us the authority to kind of like fix and control another human being.
I have a relative who's living with a guy who's divorced. She sees herself as a very devout Catholic, a very, very faithful Catholic who goes to communion every Sunday. Have I said anything to her about this? No. I know exactly how she would respond by things she has said. I don't have to ask her the first time and get rebuffed. I listen to what she says. And when she says things like, I deserve to be happy, And God, I'm sure, wants me to be happy. So she says these things. That's a topic I better not go at, and just treat her as a very loved relative and see how it plays out.
Okay, well, we're going to take a break and we'll come back in a moment and dive into the psychology of Jesus.
Oh, man.
You're listening to the Catholic Theology Show, presented by Ave Maria University and sponsored in part by Annunciation Circle. Through their generous donations of $10 or more per month, Annunciation Circle members directly support the mission of AMU to be a fountainhead of renewal for the Church through our faculty, staff, students, and alumni. To learn more, visit avemaria.edu/join. Thank you for your continued support, and now let's get back to the show.
So we've been talking about how to foster love and friendship amid this epidemic of loneliness and isolation increasing. Not only are people more isolated, they seem more nervous about interacting with people, perhaps less skillful, more likely to be distracted by their phones. And yet what you're offering is just a whole way to try to be present to other people, to get to know other people, to recognize that accepting another person as they are today is not the same thing as approving what they're doing or condoning it. So therefore, our Christian faith ought not be an obstacle to friendship.
It should attract people.
It should attract people, and it should attract us to other people because, right? I mean,
there shouldn't be roadblocks. Well,
Yeah.
that's a believer, so I can be really close to them. Well, that's not really a believer, so I can only have so much of a relationship with them. There should be those kind of roadblocks.
Yeah.
I've got friends. I play softball. And we softball players, we're thugs, okay? But I'm friends with all these guys,
Yeah.
you know, and I don't know if any of them know how to say God. I don't know, okay? But for me and them, all they know is maybe Ray doesn't cuss during the game and Ray doesn't scream at an umpire. That's all they know.
Yeah.
You know, they're not going to see me make the sign of the cross when I go up to bat because that makes God look bad when I pop up to the infield after making the sign of the cross.
Yeah, you know, it's a lot of people know that C.S. Lewis was a great convert. Was an atheist who converted back to Christianity, of Anglican sort, and that he was friends with Tolkien. And Tolkien was a very, very devout Catholic. Lewis even said one time, right, he'd been trained all his life by his family never to trust a papist, and by the literature or by the faculty never to trust a philologist. And Tolkien was both a papist and a philologist. But one of the things that's interesting about that, he actually talks about a late night conversation that they had, staying up till 3 a.m. in Oxford with Tolkien about the nature of myth and Christianity as the true myth, the story about the gods that actually happened because God did it in history. But the thing I always think is fascinating about that is that Tolkien and Lewis had a friendship of 5 years.
A deep one.
When Lewis was an atheist and who was constantly, loved myths but thought they were all untrue and thought Christianity was untrue. So, and Tolkien is friends with him intimately, such that then he was able to all of a sudden open up Lewis's imagination to realize, I love myths because actually God became a myth. God became a story. The Logos became flesh.
Told you my friend who was the atheist in the car said, Raim, I'm an atheist.
Yeah.
His mother was into a later stage dementia. He single-handedly built a mother suite on his house. And for the last 2, 3, 4 years of his life, he carried her to the bathroom. He cleaned her up when she soiled. He fed her. And I said, Dave, why are you doing that? He goes, she's my mother. She took care of me for years. Now it's my turn. So he called me one day and he said, Raim, my mom died. I said, Dave, I know you don't believe in God, but I tell you what, Dave, if he's up there, he really has to be pleased with how you took care of your mom. And all he said was, thanks, Raim. That's all he said.
Yeah. That's beautiful. And that it's interesting. I was, where was I reading this recently? But it was interesting. It was in Catherine of Siena's Dialogues, 14th century Dominican saint mystic. And she she said that basically in God's providence, God told her, God the Father spoke, and he said, like, basically, when I thought of you in my mind, when I was, I fell in love with your beauty, and so I created you. That this is like that. And Aquinas is the same thing. He speaks about the knowledge of approbation, that basically whatever God creates, he had to both know and want to bring to existence. And so that idea that, right, God actually delights in us is hard, because obviously there's much of us that's also sinful and wounded and not delightful. There's a lot of us that's messy and ugly, and that in which God does not delight. And that sin that can cover up that inner but that sense of recovering that seems to be what Christ is really doing, is he's trying to remove the sin and the shame, the binding of Satan, the binding of our sins, and so that we can recover and hear that voice, right? You are my beloved Son, right, in whom I delight.
Somebody asked me last night, so in this media world that you're in and in dealing with people as clients, how do you keep from not getting frustrated with them? How do you keep from not getting short or scolding or being snarky? How do you do that? And I said, there's a simple answer. As a Christian, I'm not allowed to do that. I'm not allowed. Christ says, don't do that. So I can't do that. You frustrate me. I can't get short with you. I'm not supposed to. And if that's operating principle, then that's going to go hand in hand with this old, I want to get to know you, but at the same time, I'm not going to push you away, because it only takes one snarky remark to screw up a friendship. Truly does. People will say to me after a talk, they'll make some comment about how it really helped them. And I said, what if at the end of that talk, you asked me a question and I went, yeah, right. I said, I guarantee you, whatever I said that previous hour would have been invalidated, because you'd have come out of there with a bad taste in your mouth. That guy's a jerk. One rolling of the eyes can take that person and put him at arm's length. Share with you another one. I think this is in the Thinking Like Jesus book. I call it Close the Book. When most people get frustrated with other people, it's because there's a recurrent difficulty. My father-in-law is so opinionated. He's always giving his opinions. He's giving his opinions about politics. I got to sit and listen to him. I had to sit next to him at Thanksgiving. And it's a buildup. My mother-in-law, she can't shut up telling me how to parent. She just can't shut up. She's always got some remark off to the side or something. And what happens is this buildup makes them more and more angry, makes them more and more resentful, makes them more and more raw. Close the Book says it should go the other way. What? You know what they're like. You've had 12 years of evidence that your father-in-law is opinionated. You've had 12 years of evidence that your mother-in-law is going to comment on your parenthood. Why is it still bothering you so much? It should be bothering you less, because this is who they are, and you can't accept that. I don't want them to be that way. Well, good luck. Call it Close the Book. It's one of the Thinking Like Jesus chapters.
I love that. And what's so you have the book we mentioned, Thinking Like Jesus and Jesus the Master Psychologist. What are some maybe what are one or two examples from Jesus's life where we can see him as a model for how we might be better friends and in our relationships with family and colleagues and
in the Master Psychologist book, Michael, I took about 18 of Jesus's wisdom for life. Just stuff. And one of the more easy to misunderstand things that Jesus said, he said, you must be like a little child. Thank you, Lord, that you've hid this stuff from the wise. You've shown it to the childlike. What? Mike, you're a bright guy. You're not like a child. You're far, far smarter than a child. What's he talking about? This child thing. And one of the examples I used, you being a daddy of 3, you know this. When they were little, you'd throw them up in the air and you'd catch them. And they squeal with delight. They're going up in the air. They're totally against gravity, but they know you're going to catch them. Complete 100% trust in daddy. If you did that to an adult, they'd freak. They'd freak out. But that little kid, well, sure, that's my daddy. He's going to catch me. Of course. I'm laughing while I'm up there. I think that's one of the things in being like a child, that trust. When I was 14, my brother died. I saw what it did to my mom and dad. I mean, it really, really rocked them. But I was a freshman in school, and I was an adolescent, and I was into girls, and yeah, okay, I missed my little brother. He was 5 months old. But I got on with life. I got on with life much more quickly than my parents did. And I think that's another aspect of you must be like a child, resilience. There's that resilience that you come back. Little kids, when bad stuff happens to them, the next day it's kind of like, well, what are we going to have to eat? They're resilient. And that's a beautiful childlike quality. And I was looking at it the way that Lord might mean when he said, you got to be like a little child. He didn't mean you got to be stupid. It didn't mean you have to be immature, throw fits. The qualities that kids naturally have that we lose as we get older. My wife said this to me once. We're talking about one of our relatives she's in her mid-30s, and she's just having a hard time meeting guys. If you're a devout Catholic woman, it's tough. You know, the pool is real thin out there.
Yeah.
And my wife said, isn't it nice when you're a little kid, you can walk up to somebody and simply say, do you want to be my friend? Sure. And it's that easy. It's that straightforward. Now, it's not saying the friendship will unravel as you get to know each other and don't like each other, but in the beginning, but as adults, we can't do that, you know?
That's great. What do you think about the stories? I was thinking of a couple of like the extended interactions that Jesus has with the woman at the well, the Samaritan woman, and then also maybe, Jesus and Nicodemus. Obviously, you have a lot of times with Jesus and Peter. I don't know if there are any of those that kind of like that you want to comment on, maybe, or pick another one from
Jesus was patient with Nicodemus. Nicodemus was a bright guy. He was religiously educated. And Jesus said, you got to be born again. And then John, as he often does, says, well, wait, how can you do that? How can you go back into the womb? And you can see Jesus going, yeah, right. Like, I'm not talking literally here, Nicodemus, okay? And he was very patient with him. Unless you're born again, you have no life in you. And he just kind of, I guess he threw the pebble. Remember the pebble you were talking about?
Yeah.
Here's the pebble.
Mm-hmm.
Think about what I just said, kind of thing. One time I was in a debate with my brother, and my brother had left the church, and I had come back. And my brother was throwing standard evangelical arguments at me. But they were based on really flawed understanding of the church. And no matter how I tried to straighten it out, he just came back with another flawed perspective. And I went, Mike, you don't know what you're talking about. And he said later, he's back in the church now, but he told me later, he said, I was so mad that you said that. He said, I just, that stuck in me for a day. And then he said, I started to think, do I not know what I'm talking about? Why would Ray say that? Ray isn't going to fire off something like that just from the hip. And then he said he started thinking about, that was that pebble.
Mm-hmm.
Pebble. Now, that was a rough pebble. It had some edges to it.
Mm-hmm. So I had a couple other questions I wanted to ask you a little bit about that. So that I just noticed from kind of my own life experience and from talking with students. I just gave a talk yesterday to a men's group on campus, and it was interesting. And the talk was not about dating, but somehow at the end, the conversation came up about dating. And you've already talked a little bit
These
about
are young
it.
guys?
Yeah, these are college students. And so, but it does seem that, like, it seems that a lot of young people kind of have lost the art of dating, have lost the art of all these different elements of whether or not it's asking someone out.
Not only have they lost it, Mike, they're scared of it.
Yeah, and one of the things that came up that was I learned asking some questions was that dating now is like almost like to ask someone out on a date is a serious commitment.
Yes.
Instead of seeing it as like, no, the date is exploratory. Let's see if we want to go on a second date. Like, but it's more, and so I don't know, there's a little bit of what I consider like almost like trying to make sure that I don't fail. So I want to be secure and right. So then I become afraid to act. So just kind of curious, what would you say to young people who might be listening? We have a lot of Ave students who listen to this podcast, right? What'd you say to them as they're negotiating kind of being young, discerning vocations, maybe, priesthood, religious life, but also to marriage, and just trying to figure out how on earth do I discover myself enough to maybe to risk being rejected if I ask people out or if I express interest in other people romantically?
I tell parents of faith, you cannot raise your children in fear. If you parent in fear of how they're going to react or what resentments they might build up, or the culture looks at you and says you're a throwback Neanderthal, just give them the keys of the car and leave because you can't parent in fear. I'm going to tell that to the young people. If you want to ask somebody out, even though the culture says that's not the way we do it anymore, you ask them out. Now, if they interpret that as, whoa, well, we're one step away from being engaged then. I guess if you ask me out twice, I guess I'll get a ring. That's their misinterpretation. You can't act in fear. You can't say, well, yeah, I'd like to get to know her, but I don't want to give her any message that I'm committed here. You're not. You're just doing what comes naturally. And if she misunderstands it, maybe you can make that clear at some point, but you can't be responsible for her misinterpretation. And that's what they're afraid of. I'm going to be misunderstood. It's going to be taken differently than I mean it. I just want to go have a cup of coffee, And all of a sudden she's talking, well, are you seeing anybody else? My son said that to me. He's 27. I said, Petey, don't you want to just meet different girls? He goes, yeah, I do, Dad. But these girls, if you do one thing with them, you're not allowed to see anybody else. I go, well, that's nuts. I go, don't buy into it. That's the way they want to think. That's the way the culture thinks. That's not the way you have to think.
Yeah, that's very well put. I love the image of when we, again, being understanding of others also there's a reciprocity there that I may not be understood.
That's exactly right.
I may not be understood, but I have a right to be understood.
You can't fear that.
And I have a right to understand myself.
You can't fear being misunderstood.
Yeah.
You can't. In extreme form, Michael, that's social anxiety.
Yeah.
I'm going to worry in certain social situations. I'm going to be judged. People are going to scrutinize me extremely. But what's happening, especially among the young people, and this is standing in the way of friendships. Well, and what if they mistake my motives? Yeah. What if they look at me in a way that I don't, that's not what I intended. Yeah.
And if you look at a lot of the studies, they'll show that around like 2013, when the phone becomes
Gene twinge?
the widespread adoption of the smartphone, going from 25% of teens to 75% of teens, social contacts goes down and everything gets mediated and curated. And I think you're right. And therefore, and it's like we somewhat intuitively want to be understood, and we kind of know we might be misunderstood. But to be misunderstood by one person is manageable. But I think when you put it online and you're misunderstood by hundreds of people, it's overwhelming. And I think it's something that you're right. We just have to push back and recover.
My son talked me into going on Instagram. I didn't want to go on Instagram. I didn't want to say, here's me eating a bologna sandwich. Isn't that nice? No. I said, I'm not going to be like that. He said, well, Dad, here's what you do. You put out these messages, and the ones that get the most viral nastiness is the religious ones. So if I put out a message regarding something about the Catholic faith or the logic of the Catholic faith in some perspective, immediately it just... And Pete says, you should hear some of this, Dad. It makes no sense whatsoever. These people are just shooting from the hip and calling names. I go, I can't fear what they're going to think. Yeah. If I do that, I'm telling the Lord, most of us are not going to be overtly persecuted. But what we do is, come on, people, don't persecute me with your thoughts and words. Come on, I can't take that.
Yeah, and it's interesting how much I think, somebody said, I don't know if it's true, I've never checked it, but I know the Bible says it a lot, be not afraid, right? Every time John Paul II said it a lot, and Jesus, the angels are always saying it when they appear, God says it. I think somewhere it says it's 365 times. But this idea that what often really gets in our way of being faithful to God, which isn't obeying an external set of commandments, but it's about being internally kind of rich and thriving with God's presence, is actually our fear. And so we have to be of good courage and be willing to do this.
Well, you got all kinds of stuff in there like that, marked up like that,
So what's one word that you would say, just in terms of your Catholic journey, maybe for somebody who's listening to this who's either struggling with their faith in God, struggling in their faith in Jesus Christ or the church, for your journey from maybe an atheist to a new atheist to an evangelical to a Catholic back home, what's one kind of maybe either insight or question that you'd want to put before them to help them maybe see things more clearly?
Logic. The Catholic faith, belief in God through Christ, is eminently logical. It truly is. The moral system works very well. It's counterintuitive. Small example, they've done surveys on who has the most sexual satisfaction. You know who it is? Committed marrieds. Well, isn't that what the church says? That's not what the culture says. Culture says you got to be free and kind of experiment and have new stuff. Oh, no, that's less according to secular studies. So the church makes sense. It makes so much sense. If you delve into science, if you look at science, there's a statistic that says of the scientists under 50, 56% of them are believers. The younger scientists are more believers than the older ones, because the older ones went through scientism. Yeah. The philosophy, the science is going to solve everything. The younger ones are going, you know what? The deeper we're getting into this stuff, the more we're seeing that it is so mathematically put together. And they're realizing, they may not chase it all the way back to Christ, but they're realizing there's a hand behind all this. So logic for me was huge. And when I was in the evangelical world, many good friends there, many faithful believers, but the system itself made no logical sense to me. And I had to become dissatisfied with the system before I looked back at the church and said, okay, what do you have to say? And I started exploring it. And the church's stance on so many things made so much sense, so logical. And that moved me heavily.
That's great. Well, as we're beginning to get to the end of our time, I'd love to ask you 3 questions. What's a book you're reading?
Right now, I am immersed in, what book am I reading right now? I just finished it. It was Spitzer's book, Robert Spitzer's book. I think it's called Christ, Science and Miracles. I always get those 3 mixed up.
Actually, I'm in conversation with Father Spitzer's assistant.
Joan?
No, Coffey. John Coffey.
Oh, I didn't know that.
He's directing, maybe not an assistant, but the director of the Magis
Center. Okay.
Yeah, director of the Magis. He's an Ave grad. Anyway, I'm going to have Father Spitzer on the Catholic Theology Show in like a month or two.
That guy he is a mind-numbing genius. What he knows, what he has. I don't know how he does this.
Right. So the book's on God and science.
Yeah, pretty much. And he talks about the shroud, talks about the Eucharistic miracles, he talks about Guadalupe, he talks about Lourdes. He talks about fascinating stuff is, how can we know that Scripture is legit? How do we know it's true? And he looks at it from a very logical perspective, And for me, that's fascinating stuff.
I love that. What's a practice you do on a regular basis to draw closer to God and find meaning and purpose?
I thought you were going to stop at what's a practice you do on a regular basis, which would be lift weights. I've lifted weights for 50 years, okay? Long ago, I decided I have to say the rosary every day. And sometimes I got to squeeze it in while I'm walking somewhere, But that's one thing I want to do. For about 20 years, I did adoration. Then I got sloppy. It was middle of the night adoration at our parish, and you didn't want the women to go, so I said, I'll take the 3 a.m. spot, you know. And so I just did it as long as it was available. Once we didn't have to do that anymore, I just kind of drifted away. But I did that. You know what? Michael, the biggest thing for me, and I always say this, it's easier for me to pray a rosary than it is to be kind to my obnoxious sister-in-law. I don't want to confuse devotional Catholic with the core of Catholic. You know, you hear people say, he's a very devout Catholic. What do you mean by that? Well, he's a daily mass goer. Now, I'll tell you what, as a psychologist, some of the daily mass goers I've seen, they're nasty people. not all of them, but some of them really are. And I want to say, okay, so you go to mass every day. How's this? You haven't talked to your dad in 7 years. How do you reconcile those two? So that's for me is big. It's easier.
So praying the rosary and then living the rosary.
Yeah, that's the harder part.
That's beautiful.
That's the harder part.
And so last question. So it's a theology show. So ideas about God matter. So what's a false belief you held about God, and what was the truth you discovered?
When I left the church, my attitude was God is God, Jesus is Jesus. I kind of got to go where it appeals to me. There's not really that much difference, and stuff. That's what I thought. Until I got into it deeper and deeper, and even though our evangelical friends are our brothers and sisters, they're radically different in a whole lot of views. And one of the things I talk about in my talks, I'll say, if I were a logical non-Catholic, I would have to say, you Catholics may be nice people, but you're nuts. Did you know that? You're nuts. You're kneeling in front of a white wafer. How's that any different than an alligator head? Okay? Because if I believe that's not God and you're doing this,
yeah,
probably the nicest thing I can say about you is, well, you're kind of misguided. It's kind of cute, cute thing. But actually, it's weird if it's not true.
So, well, thank you so much for being on the show today. Dr. Ray, if people are interested in learning more about some of your talks on parenting or relating spouses and these sorts of things,
Sure.
Where can they find you?
Easiest thing is drray.com, drray.com. All the books are there and contact pages there.
That's great. Well, thank you so much. And thanks for being at Ave Maria and doing some recording some shows here.
I took a picture and I sent it to my son and my wife. I said, you got to see this place.
That's great. Well, we're glad you came to visit and glad you're here. And thanks so much for all the work you're doing. And it's really been a pleasure. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed today's episode, please hit the like button and subscribe to the Catholic Theology Show. Thanks and God bless.